Hey, welcome back. Okay, so in this chapter, we're going to be exploring one of the most important topics in counseling ethics, and that's managing boundaries and multiple relationships. And we'll talk about what that even means. But boundaries define the limits of our professional relationships, and they help protect both the counselor and the client. So when the boundaries blur, that's when you're going to see ethical dilemmas. So let's dive into what that means and how we manage them wisely. All right, so our learning goals for this chapter are to understand the ethical guidelines around dual or multiple relationships, appreciate the various perspectives, because in our most recent iteration of these ethical codes, this topic has been revised. So it's really interesting. This is a really interesting topic. And so we're also going to identify what factors to consider before entering one of those types of multiple relationships. We'll also discuss boundary crossings versus boundary violations. One's more severe than the other. Controversies about boundaries and ethical challenges that come up in small or tight-knit communities. We're also going to talk about the pros and cons of bartering, receiving gifts from clients, social relationships with current or formal clients, sexual attractions that may come up, the fallout of sexual misconduct, and then guidelines for the use of touch in therapy. So these are all boundary issues. So let's just start with the basics. So a multiple relationship occurs when a counselor has more than one role with the client. So, for example, you might go to church with them, you might go to yoga class with them, you might be a soccer coach for their kid, your kids might go to school together. That would be considered a multiple relationship, and that's not necessarily a bad, unethical thing. I mean, it's going to happen, especially if you live in a small town. So while these overlaps are sometimes unavoidable, they're also completely objectivity and blur professional. Let me get my words straight. They complicate objectivity and blur professional judgment, right? So they're not inherently bad, but they could get in the way. So you have to be mindful with them. And so boundary crossings in multiple relationships increase the risk that a counselor could misuse power or unintentionally exploit a client, unintentionally even. So, because of that, codes of ethics caution us to avoid relationships that could impair judgment, reduce effectiveness, or lead to harm. Still, boundaries aren't about being cold or distant, they're about maintaining safety and professionalism. So, the perspectives on multiple relationships vary widely. It used to be really strict, you had to avoid them at all costs. Now there's a little more wiggle room as long as we're being mindful and documenting those things. Some professionals believe that it's best to avoid them completely still, but while others argue that in certain settings, they're inevitable and even normal. So you think about small towns, rural areas, close-knit communities, think Oxford, think Mississippi in general. Sometimes avoiding all dual roles just isn't possible. So the key to manage them ethically and intentionally, that's the key. All right, so before entering into any type of multiple relationship, you need to take the time to reflect and consult. So you need to ask yourself, what's my motivation for this? Is this in the client's best interest? Does it align with their treatment goals? Have I documented my rationale and discussed it openly with the client? You just got to be proactive and transparent. That helps prevent misunderstandings. So it's even as simple as, hey, if we see each other at Walmart, I'm going to pretend like I don't know you because I want to respect your privacy and confidentiality. But if you speak to me, I will definitely engage in a conversation with you. So just as simple as that, right? What are we going to do when we see each other in public? Just so it's not weird and damaging to the relationship. All right, now let's talk about boundary crossings, which is okay. It happens sometimes, but it can get sticky, versus boundary violations. That's our red flag, right? So a boundary crossing is a minor departure from typical practice that might actually help with the client, like attending a client's graduation to show support or like their wedding. Like that happened recently at the private practice where I am. One of the counselors went to her couples. She has a couple client and she went to their wedding and it was fine and she did it ethically and everything like that. So, a boundary violation, however, is a serious breach that causes harm or exploitation, such as developing a romantic or financial relationship with a client. So the difference lies in intent, context, and outcome. So here are some ways to minimize risk. You start by setting healthy boundaries from the very first session, obtain informed consent, documents discussions thoroughly, seek consultation and supervision whenever you feel uncertain. And I mean, always, that's always the case. You always need to be consulting when you're not sure. And then examine your own motivations regularly. Mindfulness, be mindful. And remember, ethical practice is often about preventing problems before they occur. Nip it in the bud, get ahead of it. All right, so there's some theorists, Arnold Lazarus in particular, who have argued that banning all multiple relationships can actually cause harm. He believes such restrictions sometimes led to unfair disciplinary action against counselors who did not actually harm their clients. And this reminds us that ethics is not about rigid rules, it's about thoughtful decision making and balancing context with care. It's always a gray area. So now let's consider, talk a little bit more about small and close communities. Counselors working within these environments often wear multiple hats, maybe as a school volunteer, a faith leader, a mentor, and just a member of the community in general. So avoiding all contact with clients outside of sessions can make you appear unapproachable or disconnected, and you can imagine how that would impact your relationship with the client. So the solution isn't really avoidance, it's awareness and good documentation. I mean, you don't have to document if you say hello at Walmart, right? I mean, you just, um, but if it's, use your clinical judgment. So let's talk about bartering. So this happens when a client offers goods or services instead of payment. So while it may seem harmless or even kind, bartering can easily blur boundaries. So before agreeing to barter, determine fair value, document the arrangement. I hope you can't hear the background noise in the hall. I'm in Guyton. Okay. But anyway, so you just got to document it, fair market value, put it in writing, document the arrangement. Consider if it could impair your professional judgment. Say you're working with a mechanic and you decide to barter an oil change for a session and something happens with your engine. What's that going to do to the relationship, right? So just think about that. Always prioritize fairness and clarity over convenience. I personally have never put myself in this situation or been asked to, so I can't really speak to personal experience as a counselor, but I can imagine that it would get kind of hairy. So guidelines for bartering include minimizing unique financial arrangements, preferring goods over services, and putting everything in writing. If conflict arises, bring in a neutral mediator instead of handling it directly with your client. These steps protect both you and your client and ensure transparency in the professional relationship. So you see how it can get sticky, right? Okay, so now let's talk about forming social relationships with your clients or formal clients. I mean, these are real human relationships, and you are going to like some of your clients. You are going to wish you could be friends with some of them because some of them are really cool people. And you are really forming a connection with them in your work together, but you have to keep it professional, right? So while it might feel natural to connect with someone you've worked closely with, the power imbalance from therapy can linger long after treatment ends. So a counselor may lose objectivity or unintentionally exploit their relationship. So when in doubt, maintain the professional boundary. It's better to err on the side of caution. So you cannot be friends with your clients. Um, all right, so let's shift to gift giving. And it's especially you school counselors, you might get little trinkets and pictures from your kiddos, and that is okay. That is absolutely, you do not want to reject that from a kid. But clients, adult clients even sometimes offer gifts as a token of gratitude. So when deciding whether to accept a gift, ask yourself, what is the gift's value? What's the motivation behind it? Where are we in the counseling process? And what cultural factors might influence this gesture? So like a small symbolic gift might be acceptable, but a larger or personal gifts it can signal boundary issue. I want to say the monetary value is $25, maybe $50. I don't know, adjusting for inflation, who knows? But don't accept lavish gifts. Don't let a client buy you a new car or something or a diamond necklace. Like, be for real. All right, so now we're going to shift into, let me see, I think there was something else I wanted to say about gift giving. Yeah. All right, so we're going to shift into sexual attraction in therapy. So feeling attracted to a client, it's not unethical. It's a human experience. I mean, what matters is how we handle it. Counselors must be self-aware, monitor those feelings, and never act on them. So ignoring them or pretending they don't exist can actually increase risk over time. You've got to process that stuff and get it together. It's your responsibility to manage that. It's not the client's. Um, so to deal with this, to manage these ethically, these situations, recognize your feelings early, seek consultation. How many times am I going to say that, right? And maintain strict boundaries. Avoid direct disclosures of attractions to clients. Don't put that burden on them. It can cause harm and confusion. So if attraction interferes with your objectivity, it may be best to refer the client. Ethics means recognizing our humanity while staying within professional limits. So, like I said, you might need to refer them out, terminate the relationship. Yeah. And always use supervision, consultation, and personal therapy. Do not forget about personal therapy. All right, so the harmful effects, sexual misconduct has devastating consequences. So for clients, it can cause deep emotional wounds, trauma, and mistrust of therapy in general. And then for counselors, it can result in the loss of license, lawsuits, permanent professional damage. So this is why constant self-monitoring, supervision, and consultation are essential. All right, so now we'll talk about non-erotic touch in therapy. So touch can be a way to express empathy or support, but it's one of the most controversial boundary issues. Non-erotic touch, it can be appropriate when used carefully, but it can also be misinterpreted. So always consider the client's background, of course, the trauma history and comfort level before initiating any form of touch. And if you do decide to use touch, do so thoughtfully. Ask for permission, explain your intent, and document the interaction. When in doubt, it's better to rely on verbal expressions of empathy rather than physical gestures. And remember that what comforts one client may distress another. Okay, so just to summarize, managing boundaries in multiple relationships is about ongoing awareness, self-awareness, reflection, and consultation. Set clear expectations early, communicate openly, and document your reasoning. When ethical questions arise, don't isolate yourself. You need to seek guidance and supervision. I know I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but ethics is a process. It's not a one-time decision. And that wraps up chapter 7. So we've explored the complexities of managing boundaries, the risk of multiple relationships, and how to navigate ethical gray areas. So when I see you in class, we'll work through some real world scenarios and apply these principles in practice. So I appreciate you listening. See you in class.